Thank you, Kevin. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and in 10 minutes I'm going to take you through a very quick run through the universe, and I want to talk to you about new perspectives in the search for life in the universe and what that means to you. And before I start out, I will tell you that about 7 years ago I was taking an astrobiology class, and my son was in middle school, and we would sit down and do our homework together, actually both my boys, and my youngest son looked at me and he says, "Dad," he says, "there's nothing out there. You're studying nothing." He said, "So why are you taking this course?" "Because you're spending a whole semester studying nothing." Well, what we did is we looked at where life exists on Earth, where we find it, and where we might find it in the universe. And right now, the field is exploding, and some of your lifetimes, I believe that we will find life elsewhere in the universe. So I start out with this little cartoon just to give you an illustration that NASA has sent a number of robotic probes around the solar system, and they're just amazing discoveries that are being made really on a daily basis. So I'll talk about that. We're going to take a 10-minute tour through the universe. So I want to start out with 6 concepts for you. Concept number 1. It was a geological oceanographer named Robert Ballard, and back in the late 1970s, long before he discovered the RMS Titanic, that he discovered at some of the mid-ocean ridge vents, we had a very strange life existing on Earth. So I start my talk here on Earth, that there were actually ecosystems that existed because the bacteria ate the sulfur, and the whole ecosystems were based upon synthesizing chemicals. Now, when I went to school, and I was some of you younger folks, I was your age, I was taught that in order to have a life, you had to have life on Earth, you had to have photosynthesis. Now we have discovered ecosystems at these mid-ocean ridges that live in the absence of life. They're not dependent on light. They're not dependent upon light from the sun. They exist solely because of chemical reactions in bacteria, what we call extremophile bacteria. They can exist at high temperatures, high pressures, and we found bacteria literally several kilometers deep in the earth. We found bacteria underneath the ice cap in Antarctica at the bottom of a lake where there's no light. We found bacteria in many different locations. So this is a picture of some of the tube worms at the mid-ocean ridges, and this sets the basis for where we start to look at life in the universe. Okay, so that's concept number 1, the fact that we do have these life existing in the absence of sunlight, and also we have extremophile bacteria. Okay, concept number 2 is what we call a habitable zone. Basically, the buzzword here is where there's water, there's life. And we know that the Earth, of course, has its oceans, it's got water. We now know from our Mars rovers, and we'll talk about this momentarily, that Mars about 3 billion years ago used to be a very warm, moist area. So we have this zone called the habitable zone. And the graph that you see, it basically shows you the star the size of our sun, and you see the various planets in our solar system. And now we're starting to look at other star systems and discovering planets. We see this habitable zone, this blue zone that you see in the graph, actually moves somewhat. But so the search for life has been focused essentially, obviously in extreme places on Earth. And we start to look at Mars, possibly. Venus has had a runaway greenhouse effect, basically climate change gone awry. And so Venus probably is a very low candidate, but it possibly could. So traditionally, this is where we started looking at these so-called habitable zones where water might exist somewhere in the range of Earth and Mars. All right, well, so NASA sent the Curiosity Rover. This is a self-portrait, actually, that it took, a composite of Curiosity on Mars, took it to a crater where there appears to be a dry lake bed. And just a phenomenal thing. In fact, NASA has sent a number of rovers to Mars. The Opportunity rover was designed to last 90 days, and 9 years later, it's still out there chugging along, doing some work also looking in an area where we believe water flowed on Mars. Now, we know today that Mars is a very dry, arid environment. Liquid water is not stable at the surface, but you've got ice caps on Mars. You've got glaciers that are covered, actually, with rock as well. And every now and then we see evidence from our orbiters that we've got actually water occasionally being released to the surface. I just throw this picture out because as Curiosity was landing, I don't know how many of you guys saw this picture, but one of the Mars orbiters, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, was passing overhead and actually photographed the parachute. The white dot you see at the top is a parachute, and Curiosity is suspended from it as it was coming down to the surface. So we have craft orbiting Mars, multispectral imaging, looking at the minerals, looking at the types of rocks that are there, and we definitely see evidence of water on Mars in the past. So very interesting. Here's some sedimentary rocks, for example, the kind you would find, say, in an old river deposit or in a tidal inlet. Curiosity imaged these recently. So good evidence that there was one time water on Mars. And so possibly we had microbes, possibly we had extremophile bacteria, that sort of thing. Okay, well now the new thing that's happened is all of a sudden we've looked past that zone between Mars and Earth and Mars, and we're looking now at some of the satellites of Jupiter and Saturn. I want to take you out. This is the next concept, so to speak. This is the next concept I want you to take in, and that's that now we're looking at life in places we wouldn't imagine. Europa is a moon of Jupiter. You see a picture of it here taken by one of our NASA spacecraft. I think this is from the Galileo spacecraft, and it's icy surface. It's got cracks and fractures, and we've noticed as we've sent spacecraft by Jupiter and orbited Jupiter that these cracks move just like, say, an ice cap or the sea ice you see up in the Arctic Ocean or off the Antarctic. So right now at this point, this is a NASA cartoon. What we believe is going on is that you've got this crust of ice that's quite mobile, and you've got fissures, water comes up through it, and there's a liquid ocean beneath the surface of Europa. Well, you ask yourself, how can you get liquid water that far from the sun where it's so icy cold? Well, here's the concept. As the gravity from Jupiter's gravity is so great, it imparts a tidal stress upon these moons. And so there's a tidal stress, and there's a lot of internal heating caused by that tidal stress, because the gravity at one side of the moon is different than the gravity on the other. So essentially what happens is we've got this ocean underneath. Aha, okay, well then let's take it back to what Bob Ballard found on Earth. If in fact Europa has this icy crust, has a liquid ocean maybe 50 miles or so thick, then down below that you may have basically undersea volcanics. If you have undersea volcanics and you have possibly bacteria, extremophile bacteria present, you could have actually a life in the oceans of Europa. This is not science fiction anymore, but we're moving to an era of science fact where this is certainly a likelihood. I'll move on very quickly to Saturn. This is a picture of Saturn, and you see there's a very dim outer ring. That's mostly water vapor. That's mostly water. It's not vapor. It's actually water from the moon Enceladus. Enceladus is my favorite moon in the solar system. It's got these stripes down below it, and the temperature on the surface, we noticed when NASA's Cassini spacecraft went by, was very high compared to everything else. And so here's Enceladus false color image, and we found that there are water jets, actually water being ejected from Enceladus. About 20% of the mass of this moon is formed that extra ring around Saturn. We passed Cassini through the plume. We know there's carbon dioxide, there's methane, there's water, there's organic molecules. This is one of the hotbeds of life right now in NASA's search for life in the solar system. Okay. So the last one, the sixth thing I want you to take in is when we have a spacecraft called Kepler pointed up toward the Northern Cross, the summer constellation. If you go out on a dark night, you can see. In a little 12-degree field, Kepler has been looking for planets outside of our solar system. It's trying to find habitable type planets. Well, so far, and I've got an app on my iPhone, that there are 887 planets discovered outside of our solar system, and Kepler has discovered several hundred with actually a couple of thousand candidates. And the habitable zones are being looked at in other star systems. So maybe we're not alone. And this is a picture showing, a cartoon showing NASA released this about 2 weeks ago, showing a star system where we have planets in the habitable zone. So just for the sake of time, I want to take you all the way through. So if you're not interested in science, this affects people in law, it affects people in medicine, public health. If we found life somewhere else in the solar system, how would it affect our society? What are the ethics? What is the effect upon society? And so this funny cartoon basically shows of someone shaking hands with an alien and risking human annihilation because he tried to pull his head off, not knowing what we're doing. So, for example, when we sent Galileo out to Jupiter, we ended up burning it up in the atmosphere when the mission was over with, so we wouldn't take Earth's microbes and contaminate, say, Jupiter's moons. But what would happen to our society when we find maybe either microbial life or possibly less so, little green men and women out there somewhere? Well, let me kind of take this all down to you in the time that we've got. That, as you go to college and you think about what courses you should take. When I was going to school, when someone said, you should take history of Western civilization, I'm going to tell you that a couple of courses you might think about. Historical geology, the history of the Earth. I took that as a freshman and changed the whole way I looked at the universe, the whole way I look at life and evolution of our planet. The same thing goes for now planetary geology. If in fact one planet's not enough, planetary geology will teach you a comparative study of different planets and how we fit in with those. And lastly, I would urge you too to try to combine, if you're not a science person, combine maybe science as a minor or a certificate. Do that, combine two different areas. Or if you're a science person, study that, maybe then study some other subject, a liberal arts subject, something of that nature. Carl Sagan, famous astronomer, made the statement, if you want to make apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. So as you go out in your education, think of, start at the basics, but think cosmically as well. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much.